Okay, people, so now it's, what is it, March 6th, 2020. It's like 10 after 5 in the morning. I'm sitting here in the dark, obviously, you can see that. Thinking. Right? Mode of attack. Right? Why are you doing this? Yesterday, I was thinking, well, I wasn't thinking, I was talking to Tisha about crying for ShaMay. In the context of, like, when somebody dies, right? That you really are connected with. And you've had a lot of experience with, right? So that when they die, there's a part of you that ends up crying that you can't really control, okay? I've only experienced that once in my life, people, and that was with my mother. And that didn't even happen until after a week after her death. And it only happened because I was at the wake that my aunts and uncles and grandmother put together for my mother, because my mother was the first one to die out of 5 kids, right? And my grandmother was still alive at the time. So, of course, when my mother died, who died under suspicious circumstances, people, was probably beat by her common-law husband, and then, you know, cops just covered it up. She had bruises all over her face and shit, and her body, and they said that it was because she fell out of bed when she died, and that's how she got the bruises, and they fucking let the guy walk. And a week after, he moved another woman into the same bed that he beat my mother in, and she rolled out of and fell on the fucking floor, you know, gave her my mother's shit, right? Because he wouldn't give me all my mother's stuff. He only gave me the old pots and pans and stupid shit like that. But he kept all her jewelry and whatnot. So anyway, a year after my mother died, right? He died in the same bed, people. Because he was doing an ICBC claim. And he was fighting it at the time when my mother died. Anyway, a year later, he got his ICBC claim of $450,000. And this was like, oh my God, I'm, 59 now? I'm 59, and I was 25 when my mother died. So how many years is that? 34 years? So that was like 34 years ago or something like that, right? And what do you call it? He got his $450,000 ICBC claim, and within a week, people, within 1 week, he was dead in the same bed that my mother had died in. The point is, after she died, right, I didn't cry. Now, mind you, my mother had already had 1,000 deaths. So when she died, I wasn't surprised, per se. I mean, obviously I was surprised to hear about the bruises and stuff. But again, you can't argue with authority figures if they're telling you, no, it was an accident. She fell out of bed. She mixed pills with booze. And then somehow, some way, between being in a stupor, she rolled off the bed as she was dying. And that's how she got all these bruises. Case closed, move along, right? Nothing new with the cops. So anyway, prior to her death, right, what do you call it? Because of her drinking, because she was an alcoholic, right, and she took pills, so you know what that's like if you've ever been around somebody like that. It was very volatile as I was growing up. Now, mind you, don't get me wrong, my mother was a good mother. She provided good environments. She was very creative. She was productive. She was a go-getter. She wasn't afraid to work, right? And she was classy. She was a classy woman, right? But unfortunately, she suffered from alcoholism. And because, you know, in those days, doctors were really gung-ho with prescribing pills, you know, she took the prescription because the doctor said so, but at some point over the years, the two started to merge together, right? And so throughout the years, there was times when, you know, she'd go into her feel sorry mode and she'd want to commit suicide, and I want to die, you know, blah, 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 right? Which we all feel at one point or another in our lives, throughout our lives, right? But, you know, obviously you gain coping skills and you push those things aside so that you can be a responsible adult. Well, obviously my mother functioned, but through her alcoholism over a period of years, and if anyone knows what alcoholism is like, you know, in the beginning first stages of it, the people that are alcoholics can, you know, normally handle themselves, right? To the point where, you know, the brain doesn't get severely affected. But as they drink over the years, you know, you add in 10, 20, 30 years, right? Because my mother was 45 when she died. By the time she was in her 40s, you know, maybe not each and every time that she drank, she'd go for a loop, but, you know, those loops were coming closer and closer in terms of, like, just off the wall, right, with her drinking, with the way the brain alters and their whole personalities change, right? So throughout the years, what I'm trying to say is there was 3 or 4 times where my mother supposedly wanted to commit suicide and would therefore take, you know, pills, right, to speed that process along. And 2 times in particular that I clearly remember, and I know there was more, but one time I was like in grade, oh God, probably 8 or 9. I was probably in grade 8 or 9, and this behavior with my mother had already been going on for a while, off and on, in between good spells, right? Because there was times when she wouldn't quit smoking, quit drinking, right? So through that not drinking stage, obviously things were better, but as soon as she started drinking again, it would build up, and then you'd have this episode where, you know, I'm at school, but because as I left the house, right, as I left the house, you know, on the bus to go to school in Alberta in the fucking snow, okay, we're talking 40 below weather, you're going off to go to school, but you're feeling uneasy about it because your mother's been drinking, and, you know, kind of going into that dark place, right, where, you know, quite possibly she could kill herself, and God forbid if you were at school and came home and found a dead body. So long story short, I went to school, but as I'm thinking, I'm like, no, go back home because, you know, obviously she's unstable. And I would have been in grade 8 or grade 9 or something by this point, right? Probably grade 8. I was 12, 13, maybe 14, 13. I was probably about 13 years old, so whatever grade that was. And, what do you call it? And, like, this is like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning because I'm going to school, right? So I decide to come back home. So I go to school thinking, and then I'm like, no, fuck, just go home, right? Something said go home. Something told me to go home in my head. So that's what I did, people. I went home, and by the time I walked up to where we were living, there was all these people banging on the door, right? Like a whole group of them, and police or whoever, right? But what stands out to me is her doctor at that time. The doctor that was prescribing her these prescription pills, okay? He's banging on the door with all these people at fucking 9 o'clock in the morning. It's fucking winter time. And, like, I'm like, okay, so I'm the one with the key, right? So I open the door. Everybody goes running upstairs, right? to her bedroom, and they rescue her. Basically, that's what they did. She didn't die that day, people, because I happened to come back home and open the door, okay? And through this process, though, this doctor, he was kind of yelling at me, telling me that it was my fault that my mother tried to commit suicide because somehow, some way, I was so-called misbehaving. I don't know what the fuck I was doing. Obviously, I was going to school. I was just a kid, right? And that I was causing so much stress to my mother, and if maybe I was a better child, right, my mother wouldn't do such things. That's basically what he did, and, like, I've never forgotten that, people, ever. And, you know, did it impact me for the rest of my life? I don't know. I just remember that doctor accusing me that it was my mother it was my fault for my mother being so distressed with her own life because she couldn't control me as a adolescent. And when I was going to school, people, it's just maybe I was struggling with school, maybe I was tired. You know, there was times I'd be in bed, literally sleeping, okay? And it was a three-level townhouse, right? Beautiful townhouse. Like I said, there was times when she could, you know, be the epitome of what is right in society kind of thing, you know? But I remember one time I was laying in bed, you know, I had my own little place downstairs because she had revamped, like she had the basement, you know, it was an empty basement, and then a suite was built into it. So anyway, that's where I was sleeping down there, right? Like it didn't have a kitchen, but it had, and it didn't have a bathroom, but it had a nice room, and that's where the cold storage was, and the laundry room, and then, you know, close the door, and then go on the other side was this big open room that was like a finished basement. I guess that's what you call it. It was a finished basement. When we moved in, it was an unfinished basement, and by the time she moved in and decided to do what she wanted to do, it was this beautiful, what is it called? Finished basement that, I think it even had a bar setting in there if you wanted to have it. So, okay, so anyway, what was I saying? I don't remember what I was saying. So yeah, that doctor, right? He just tried to put it on me. But the thing is, she had already tried that before a few times as I was growing up, right? Wasn't a lot, you know, maybe 5-6 times. But that's enough times to insulate you from the time when it happens, I guess you can say. Because each time she threatened to kill herself or whatever, you know, you build up an immunity to it. This is why I couldn't stand Joan, because Joan liked to manipulate with that's Auntie Joan, right? Uncle John's wife. This is why I couldn't stand her, because when people do shit like that, it's just a form of manipulation to manipulate somebody else, basically. I'm not saying that the feelings aren't valid, because I'll even, oh, I hate my life, I don't want to be here anymore, you know, fucking get away from you, you know. It's one thing to think like that in a fleeting moment and then, you know, gather yourself up and move on and be responsible. It's another thing to think like that and play on that and then use that to manipulate people by as far as going as to taking pills, but making sure that somebody's around you to save you before the shit really hits the fan. So, you know, over a period of time, you know, like I'm pretty sure people, if I wouldn't have came home that day and opened the door, my mother probably would have died. Unless, of course, they were going to bust down the door, but I don't know to what extent, because I showed up. I let them in, and they saved her. And the only reason I let her in is because she had been let them in. The only reason I came home is because they were showing signs of, she was showing signs previous to that on different occasions where the possibility of her actually killing herself could occur. So with that said, going to school and with that strong urge with something saying, no, you really need to go home. What do you call it? I went home and they saved her. Right? And then another time I can think of, this is like before she died, right? That really stands out in my brain. Now, by this time, we're not in Alberta anymore. I'm older now, right? And I think I even had Brooks. And I had her car. It wasn't because she lost her license from drinking and driving. And it was the old Pontiacs, right? The old Pontiacs, the long ones that almost look like a T-Bird or a Cadillac, like the long-ass Pontiacs, right? That's what I had, because that was her car when she lost her driver's license. And we were in Victoria by this time, right? Because she went to Victoria, my grandmother was there, and then I moved out of Alberta, went back to Victoria, and so anyway, she called me up, was mumbling on the phone, mumbling, it wasn't really making any sense. And I remember, I don't know, it was just, again, something said, get in your car and go see your mom, just go, you gotta go. So I got into the car, and I was driving, right? And then I was at a stoplight, like a red light, eh? Right? And I was rushing, right, to get to her. Because of the, I was so concerned, right? And then as soon as the light turned green, I bolted, right? But I got T-boned because I bolted as soon as the light turned green. Because my mom, gotta go see my mom, and she was living up in James Bay area by this time. So I had to drive a little bit, right? And as I'm driving, you get to a stoplight, and I'm like, hurry up, waiting for the light. Light turns green, I bolt, and I get T-boned. So I dealt with that, and then I get to my mother's house, and sure enough, I had to call the ambulance. So when my mother did die, there was no shock. I just wasn't surprised, people. I had been desensitized to it from previous actions in the past with her behavior, acting out for attention, basically. Right? And that's why I didn't like Joan, because she brought that kind of mentality into the house with her. Oh, I'm dying every 2 fucking weeks. But, Uncle John wanted Auntie Joan, and I really didn't understand the severity of her issues because we had been separated. Right? She never lived with me before. And until you really live with somebody, you just don't know these things, right? Unless, of course, you get, something all written up where it's like finely detailed that this person likes to die every 2 weeks. Like, how many times in a fucking year can you die? Joan was dying every 2 weeks, so, kind of annoyed me. But outside of that, when my mother died, I didn't cry, people. This is what I'm trying to say. I didn't cry. I wasn't surprised. Obviously I was upset, right? But I was prepared. That's the thing. I was prepared. My mother had prepared me for it. So I went about doing whatever, and then a week later, obviously the wake was there, and then I think what the trigger was for me was the fact that all my aunts and uncles were there, my cousins, my grandmother, my family. My family was there outside of my mother. And then that's when it really kind of sunk in, right? That it was my mother who died, right? And with that, I just broke down. This is what I told Tisha yesterday. I just broke down and cried. I couldn't control it. I couldn't stop it. I don't know where it came from. It dropped me to the floor, and I'm bawling my eyes out in a way that I've never bawled my eyes out in my whole life. I didn't do that with ShaMay, okay? And there's 2 reasons why I don't do it. One is because, and I've said this before, in the back of my mind when I had that dream was seeing ShaMay dead, and that whatever happened to ShaMay was going towards Tisha's room, and Tisha was going to be next. And then that's when I woke up crying from the dream, because I was crying as I woke up. There's an inner part of me that's afraid to cry like I cried for my mother. Because right now I'm rationalizing that if I don't cry like I cried for my mother, right? Then somehow I'm not being true to ShaMay. Because the only thing that I can compare grieving with, really, is with my mother. Because I didn't cry for my uncle, right? My Uncle Nick said goodbye to me on the phone, right? Made his confession that he had my mother's will for the last 12 years, and he just didn't tell me. And he feels real bad now that he didn't help me go after Harji, considering that he had my mother's will, but he didn't tell me about it and hid it from me for 12 years. But now that he was dying, he wanted to know if I wanted it. And I told him, no, you can fucking keep it, because what's the point? It's done. Right? And then he died. I didn't cry for my Uncle Nick. Do I miss him? Do I love him? Yes, I do. My Uncle Harry came to me and said goodbye on the day on the night he died. I was sleeping. He came to me. He jumped on me. He grabbed my shoulders. He was shaking me, saying, wake me up. I gotta go. I gotta go. Oh, I gotta go. And I'm looking up at him as he's shaking me, and I'm saying, okay, go, go, go. And then he was gone. And then I got a phone call the next day, well, that morning, because, this was in my sleep, right? And I was told that my Uncle Harry died. So I didn't cry for him, people, because he had already said goodbye to me. Right? Same thing with my grandmother. I didn't cry for her either, because the night she died, she came to me and she took me up to her place in heaven and showed me where she was going to be. She told me she wasn't going to live with all her kids, just some of them. Now, mind you, my mother's already up there, right? Because she died, right? All the other ones were still alive. But she reminded me that she wasn't obligated to live with 5 kids just because she had 5 kids. But she was moving on, and where she was going, she was quite happy with her little space. And then she sent me away and said, I'll see you again sometime. And then I woke up, and then I got a phone call, and I was told that my grandmother had died. So I didn't cry for her, people, because she had already came by and said goodbye, right? She showed me where she was, and everything was fine, right? And she told me she'd see me again, and so be it. So I didn't cry. So the only thing I have a comparison to in terms of grieving would be my mother, where I broke down, fell to the knees, and just was in an uncontrollable cry in terms of a grieving. That's kind of what I want to do for ShaMay. But ever since that day, even now, people, I'm fighting back the tears. Okay? Now, whether it is because if I start crying, mad cry, does that mean that Tisha's going to die too? Because in my dream, right, I woke up crying because whatever was happening to Tisha, or to ShaMay, whatever was happening to ShaMay was going towards whatever happened to ShaMay, whatever made ShaMay die was going towards Tisha's room, and Tisha was next. And then I woke up. And I told this to Tisha yesterday because as I work on this paperwork, right, which could very well put me in jail, right? You know what I'm saying? Or whatever. I mean, obviously the gang stalking won't stop. If anything, it will probably get worse. But this is something that I have to do, people. But as I work on it, I want to cry. Right? So 2 or 3 days ago, I sit here, I think, like I want to cry right now, because I know I have to go in there and work, which is going to make me want to cry more. 3 days ago, I told myself, okay, just sit here and cry a little bit. It's okay to cry, right? Clean your eyes. Your eyes are not well. I'm putting in eye drops. Eye drops can make you depressed. It says on the box, if you become depressed, whatever that means, right? There's no definition of what depressed means, but, it could be a side effect of these eye drops, right? But I'm depressed anyway, so how do I determine if it's from what I'm going through or if it's with the eye drops? And of course, the closer I get to filing this stuff, knowing what the next step is going to be after I file it, I go into panic mode with just the body because I know what I'm up against with this corruption, right? I'm not dealing with nice people. The court is not a good place to be, people, even if you're the victim, right? So anyway, let me just stay on track. So I said to Tisha, no, let me finish this, right? So like 2-3 days ago, I want to cry, and I'm like, okay, just let some tears go. Nobody's here, nobody can see you, right? Who's watching? Nobody that you're aware of. It's okay, cry, because if you cry them out, then you can get strong again and follow through what you need to do until those tears well up again. And when they well up, be aware that they're going to do that because they've been doing that. And versus trying to hold them back for whatever reason, right? Let them out. You don't have to, because I go back to that default of the grieving that I had from my mother when it hit me like a ton of bricks and I just couldn't stop crying. I want that same cry for ShaMay, but I can't do it, people. I can't do it because in my dream I woke up crying. And if I wake up crying, then I'm worried that Tisha will get targeted and be injured to the point of where whatever happened to ShaMay, and we know what happened to ShaMay, will happen to Tisha. So that stops me from crying for my daughter. However, you see, I'm letting the tears out, right? Because every day I'm crying, people. With my mother, I cried once. With ShaMay, I'm always crying. I just don't cry in the sense the way I cried for my mother. Right? It's better for me to release these tears now, even if they're in little batches. This is what I'm trying to say. So that in a half an hour from now, or an hour from now, when I go and I sit down to continue typing, my eyes are clear, right? I want to cry now, right? Because I've released them. Just because they don't come out all at one time in a fucking river doesn't mean I haven't been crying or I won't continue to cry. But when you look at it over a 2-year period, basically, that's a lot of crying. So for every tear that I've shed over the last 2 years for ShaMay, even if it's just a drop, is the equivalent, if not equal to, what I cried for my mother when I dropped down to my knees and I couldn't stop it, people. Right? So, and another thing I was thinking, this is what I told Tisha. I just said, look, I can't use my mother as the milestone to say that I've grieved for my daughter in terms of crying, right? Because everybody's different. I didn't cry for my grandma. I didn't cry for my uncles, right? I never cried for my aunt because I don't even know when she died. She just took her ass to Kelowna and disappeared and then died. I mean, how can you cry over somebody like that? You can't, right? Even though you loved your aunt and you admired her, I mean, it was her choosing to move out and to disconnect. And so when she died, I didn't cry for her. I cry every day for ShaMay, or I fight back mainly the tears. That's what I do. But I'm just wondering what it's going to be like when I go to court, people, and I have to cry, and I'm in front of an impatient judge with a lawyer that just wants to slam dunk the whole shit into a garbage can and then walk away thinking he did a good job, right? So that's where I have to kind of disperse my tears, and stay strong, right? To the best of my ability. Because there are 7 corporations, I forgot to mention the ambulance department, because they're first responders that came to the house right along with the police, and between the two of them, they knew what they were doing. Just like CIBC Bank and Fraser Health Authority knew what they were doing together between the two of them with Uncle John. Well, the same shit was going on with the paramedics and the police in my basement on the day ShaMay was murdered. Right? So, I am just going to type for a few days. I'm at 10 pages. We know we're maxing it off at no more than 20. I mean, obviously, they're not going to like anything I write. They're not going to like any way I write it. Right? And when I go file it, I'll be filing it with Amari and, Andre I'm going to, people. And I'm going to make a little note. I'm already trying to design it in my head where I can advertise for help. You know, I need help. Advocate, court advocate, someone that understands civil lawsuits or notice of claims. This isn't civil. I don't know what this is. Supreme Court's not civil. Civil is like a state or a provincial or like through an individual. This is something else. So if I'm working in the library, I'm going to put this on I'm going to fold it like this with my little sign so people can see it as they're walking by. If I'm sitting at the table trying to fill out paperwork before I submit it, maybe I might get some help that way. But if I don't, I'm not going to let that stop me, right? And just because I didn't break down and cry like I did for my mother, to which I haven't done for ShaMay, for whatever reason, doesn't mean I don't mourn and continue to mourn my daughter, because I do. Right? Every day. It's just when I really get into this stuff and having to type and get discouraged before I even get it printed out, just because I know what kind of corruption I'm up against, then I get even more overwhelmed and want to cry even more, right? But I can only cry so much for so long. And that's all I really want to say about this video. I was going to take you into War Room 2, but there is no point. This video is already long enough. I said what I had to say. Right? So, I don't want to feel sorry for myself. I can sit here and I'm trying to plug this in. I can sit here and say, oh, nobody's helping me. Oh, I'm so alone. Oh, you know, just a whole lot of ohs. What the hell, why can't I do this? But for those ones that are praying for ShaMay, praying for Andre, praying for Amari, and the rest of the family, praying for ShaMay, well, I don't feel so alone right now then, with that knowledge, right? So yeah, basically, I had the dream. Whatever happened to ShaMay was going towards Tisha's room, and she was going to be next. And that's when I woke up crying. And from the time ShaMay was laying dead on the futon, I have been crying ever since, people. Ever since. It just didn't come out in one big wave. It's been coming out in little waves, and it hasn't stopped.